Excellent. I'm going to get started. Then let me pull up my notes as appropriate. Good afternoon, everyone. For the record, my name is Anissa Sabi-George, Boston City Councilor at Large, and I'm Chair of the Boston City Council's Committee on Education. Today, I'm joined by colleagues, the lead sponsor, Councilor Mejia, Councilor Braden, and Councilor Flynn. I don't think any have signed on. I'll recognize them as they join us this afternoon. This is a public hearing that's being recorded and live streamed at boston.gov/city-council-TV. It will be rebroadcast on Xfinity Channel 8, RCN Channel 82, Verizon, Vios Channel 964. We will take public testimony at the end of this hearing. If you wish to testify via video conference, please email Shane, SHANE, .pac@boston.gov to sign up. When you are called, please state your name and affiliation or residence and limit your comments to no more than a few minutes to ensure that all comments can be heard. You are also welcome to submit written testimony by emailing ccc.education@boston.gov. Today's hearing is on docket number 1079 in order for a hearing on the status of early education and child care workers. We have a number of guests that will be joining us for for two panels, and we'll get to the discussion. I'm first going to welcome the lead sponsor of today's hearing, Councilor Mejia. Councilor Mejia.
Yes, thank you. Good afternoon, everyone. And thank you to the chair for working with our office to get this hearing scheduled. For months, we have been working alongside SEIU 509 to explore ways that the city can take an active role in uplifting and supporting childcare workers, early childhood educators. Here we are, and here are the facts. Childcare employment is still down more than 126,000 positions as workers leave for higher paying positions as bank tellers, administrative assistants, and retail clerks. Parents are struggling to return to work as daycare and after-school programs dwindle. What are some of the reasons why we're seeing this massive decrease in childcare workers? Well, for one, the pay isn't sufficient. Childcare workers have roughly wages 23% lower than those of similar workers in other occupations, and only 15% of childcare workers receive health insurance at their jobs. On top of that, women of color make up a larger portion of childcare workers than do any other occupations. So we're dealing with a number of things all at once that have led up to the current situation we're in. In this hearing, I'm hoping that we will hear from the administration and our advocates, not just about how they see the current scope of the problem, but what we can do collaboratively to improve the status of childcare workers in Boston. Thank you to all the folks at SEIU 509 for their efforts in organizing this hearing, and the advocates who have been doing this work to get us off the ground. Thank you so very much, Councilor Sabi-George, for hosting again, and my colleagues for participating.
Thank you very much, Councilor Mejia. I don't know if Councilor Braden has a brief opening statement, or Councilor Flynn. Councilor Braden.
Thank you, Madam Chair, and thank you to the lead sponsor for bringing this issue forward. I think we're all very aware of the challenges of our early education sector and the challenges of recruiting and retaining quality staff. So I'm very interested to participate in listen to what the panelists have to say and participate in the conversation this afternoon. Thank you.
Thank you very much, Councilor Braden. Councilor Flynn, brief opening statement.
Thank you. Thank you, Councilor Sabi-George, for your leadership. Thank you, Councilor Mejia, the sponsor, for your important work as well. I'm here to listen. I'm here to learn more about the subject, and I hope I'm able to be a good advocate going forward. Thank you to the panelists for the excellent work that you've been doing for so many years. Thank you, Councilor Sabi-George.
Thank you, Councilor Flynn. And we do have for our first panel a number of leaders in this field, as well as in the second panel. But I'll first welcome Tiara Diaz from the Boston Public Schools, who's the director of Universal Pre-K, Jason Sachs, who's executive director of the BPS Department of Early Childhood Education, Ayana Polk, who's the communications and outreach manager for women's advancement here for the city of Boston, and then Trin Nguyen, who's the director of the Office of Workforce Development. I'm not sure Councilor Mejia is the lead sponsor who you'd like to start with. I have Tiara first on my list.
Go ahead with that. Thank you, Councilor.
Welcome, Tiara.
Hello, everyone. Thank you so much for having us. Can you hear me okay?
Yes.
I'm double masked, so let me know if you're having any trouble. I'm joined by my colleague, Jason Sachs, who's sitting right next to me, but you'll see him there. If you're not familiar, Jason Sachs leads the early childhood department where Universal Pre-K sits. Universal Pre-K is part of the department, which also includes K2, first and second. And I have some slides. Should I share my screen? Is that okay?
You're welcome to. Go right ahead.
Awesome. Just give me a second here. So I'm not going to dive too much into Universal Pre-K because we did present in March. I want to make sure if you're not familiar with what Universal Pre-K is, that I give you a quick snapshot. But certainly, I've both hyperlinked and I'm available afterwards for questions if you have them. So Universal Pre-K is a citywide initiative to ensure that every 4-year-old across Boston has access to high quality education. So whether a family is choosing a community-based organization or Boston Public Schools or a non-traditional school, that they receive high quality. And when we talk about high quality, we mean that's national and statewide accreditation. That means enhanced in-family engagement. That means an evidence-based curriculum. And that means the 2 indicators that I'm going to talk about on the next slide, which is highly paid and degreed educators. Currently, Universal Pre-K has expanded into community-based organizations in 2019. So you'll see here in the middle, I have our numbers. We're at 3,200 seats for 4-year-olds, with almost 80% of those being in BPS and about 20% of those in our community-based. Under Mayor Janey, we were able to do some expansion for 3-year-olds, and under Mayor Wu, we're going to keep expanding to continue to serve 3-year-olds in the next year. So as I indicated, our focus is really on high degreed and qualified and well-paid, compensated educators in Universal Pre-K. So our community-based programs, we had them raise the educator salaries for lead teachers to $58K. I've also hyperlinked the salary grid there for you, so you can also look at the teacher, director, and family engagement increase. But it's important to note that we did increase the lead teacher salary to $58K for this year. And as a result of that, we also went back and we looked at the staffing. We wanted to know who has left our UPK classrooms. And you can see from the resignation column that we've had very little turnover. So in comparison to the state, which is a 30% turnover, our UPK classrooms have only had 4%. So it's certainly an indicator that the salaries is a plus, that it's somewhat helpful in retaining educators. And so despite all of the pandemic and the increase in the unemployment rate, we have seen that our UPK teachers have been fairly stable. I also wanted to note that in our UPK budget, about 70%, so that's $4 million, of our budget is spent on salaries. And so if you're thinking about the community-based organization's budget, about 70% of that is spent on staffing. I also wanted to highlight the staffing credentials because another requirement in Boston UPK is that our lead teachers have a bachelor's degree. We also require that the assistant teacher has an associate's and the director has a bachelor's degree as well. And currently in all of our UPK programs, except for one, we have lead teachers with bachelor's degrees. We do have one lead teacher that's working towards her bachelor's degree. And as you can see, it's not even just the lead teachers across the board. If you're looking at assistant teachers, as well as co-teachers, you'll see that they also have a bachelor's or master's degree. And in addition to the salaries and the degree requirements, Boston UPK also provides coaching. So we have coaches that go into programs anywhere from once a month to 6 times a month to provide that curriculum implementation support. We also provide professional development, both from Boston Public Schools, but also outside. So special education, social emotional supports, power of parenting. And then lastly, we offer some credit-bearing courses. We currently offer 2. One is for the focus on pre-K curriculum through UMass Boston. And then the second one is an instructional team. So it includes the director and the teacher, and they work together through this credit-bearing course to really develop strong leadership and instructional practice. I want to mention here that as we begin to offer these courses, we have run into some challenges. Specifically, if a participant owes the college funding, if we're thinking about going back to in-person, certainly childcare is a challenge. Technology was a challenge for programs that were moving towards these courses. So these were all things that we had to consider as we built out the model. And then lastly, I just wanted to highlight here some of our ongoing goals. I mentioned prior that we want to continue to expand to serve more 3-year-olds. Really thinking about that program-wide salary increase. So what does salary look like in other preschool or infant and toddler classrooms? That's something that we really need to think about. And we have a fiscal working group that's working through that now. Degree pathways, so we really want to create opportunities to grow leaders internally, thinking about where our teachers are starting, what are their career goals, and helping grow through a degree pathway. And then lastly, as we expand into family childcare and more non-traditional schools, we want to really think about the UPK model in a more scalable way. And I think I covered everything. I'm going to have Jason jump in and see if I missed anything, okay?
I would just add 2 things, that while we made the lead teacher comparable to a BPS teacher starting salary, we also had room for assistant teachers and co-teachers and directors to receive salary increases. And so that's something you really want to think about. And I think you covered everything else, but we're happy to answer any questions. And if you have any questions about the Boston Public Schools as well, although we haven't seen the same kind of turnover, we've definitely seen some challenges with teachers being sick, as you all know, I'm sure. And that central office has had to play a role in covering schools as well. So I think that there's staffing challenges everywhere, but really in the community-based programs, as you've already brought up, there's greater challenges around salaries, but salaries do seem to be a stabilizing force in community-based programs. The other thing I was going to tell you was, anecdotally, we're hearing if a teacher leaves a UPK program, it's a lot easier to fill that space than it is in other classrooms. And so again, it's just you get what you pay for, and so we need to find ways to pay for it.
Great, thank you, Tiara and Jason. I don't know if we want to stop for questions here, Councilor Mejia, or move on to the rest of this panel. Ayana and Trina with us. I also want to note that Councilor Michael Flaherty has also joined.
Thank you, Councilor Asabi George. I think let's just, if folks are okay, we can just go with the panel, and then we can just, the council can ask all the questions at once. Thank you.
Ayana, I have next on my list, Polk.
Yes, good afternoon, everyone, and thank you for including the Mayor's Office of Women's Advancement on this very important discussion. I know for the bulk of the work we do is centered around childcare as an economic equity issue, not only for parents and caregivers, but looking at the industry as a whole. And as it was stated by Councilor Mejia, the industry is largely women of color, and in the city of Boston, largely immigrant. So we're dealing with a lot of folks who need the support holistically, and the Mayor's Office of Women's Advancement has really taken some innovative strides in making sure that we're supporting the entire ecosystem when it comes to care for our little ones. So I will go on and share my screen just to give a high level look at the things we've been doing here at Women's Advancement. One moment. Apologies. All right. So with our department here at the Mayor's Office of Women's Advancement, when we look at childcare, again, we do look at it as an economic equity issue, not only for the providers, but for families as well, because childcare is a very important key for families to be a part of the workforce. So when we look at the entire ecosystem of care, we want to make sure that we're listening to our residents to understand the climate in the city of Boston. So we've prided ourselves in making sure that we're doing first in the nation approaches around collecting this data and listening to our residents through a couple of initiatives and research studies that we've done that I'll talk about in a moment. And with those findings, we really saw an opportunity to not just support families, but to really help those entrepreneurs in that space, because we understand as women entrepreneurs, there are a lot of hurdles when you are creating your own business, but they are essential to making sure the engine that is the city keeps moving. So we've done a lot of things in supporting those entrepreneurs, not only to support them as business owners, but to make sure that we're expanding seats in different spaces so that there are different options for care to meet everyone where they're at, especially seeing the needs around travel, around affordability that we've seen through our research. And then also making sure that workplaces are great partners and advocates for those that they employ, because we understand looking at childcare, with a lot of the research that we've done, we've seen that, folks who are going to work are advocating for more flexible options so that way they can be there to support their families. So when we look at the climate of care, we try to look at each point that I've spoken of to make sure that everyone has a hand in creating the solution. So just to give a high-level introduction to the work that we've been doing here. When it comes to research, we do have an annual childcare study that is distributed along with the city census. We do that in collaboration with the Economic Mobility Lab. In 2019, we conducted our first survey, and with those findings, we've seen a lot of the things that we all feel individually in our neighborhoods and in our homes, that 88% of respondents say that it's not affordable, that things are too far or too difficult to access. And even in our report that we did the following year, that's called Too Much and Not Enough, it really took a deeper dive into the status of care for families during COVID. So that was a really important study for us to really open our eyes to see how we can inform the work that we do and how we can meet people where they're at. So with a lot of that information, and just also to say, we are releasing our 2021 findings from our survey in December, and we're looking forward to putting out that survey again in 2022 along with the census, so we can keep collecting this information and seeing where we can, what the status is and how we can support and evolve our practices. And then using all of that information, especially when we're talking about travel and affordability, we understood that childcare entrepreneurs were a part of the answer. We've been doing the Childcare Entrepreneur Fund since the beginning of 2020, and it's been a very great experience to see the family childcare providers be a part of the program. We largely advertise it through our channels here at the City of Boston. And up to date, we've graduated more than 100 providers through this program. What happens is they apply, and once they become a part of a cohort, they attend 6 different workshops. These workshops entail different aspects of running a small business, and particularly a family childcare business. So they're taught not only to understand the licensure and those particular things for the industry, but really looking at, the marketing, how to make sure that they're keeping a book of business and different softwares needed in order to make sure that their businesses thrive. And a lot of them, once they complete, they use those flexible grant funds of $3,500 each to support the business in the way that they see fit. So some people have used it for PPE, some people have used it for toys and other educational items for their businesses. So we've seen a lot of different people thrive in those aspects. And one thing that that I'm very proud of when it comes to the program, we've been able to touch many providers that speak a number of different languages. We have partners over at the United Way that we've worked with, that we've been able to provide this workshop in Spanish, Somali, and a number of other languages. So we're making sure that we're breaking down those barriers in order to meet the providers where they're at, to give them the resources they need. Also, earlier this year, we did distribute the childcare contribution fund in collaboration with the BPDA. And those childcare services were also used for organizations in Boston that are looking to expand childcare. Everything that I'm speaking about is hyperlinked in my presentation, and you're more than welcome to click, read more. And if you do have any questions, I'm more than happy to follow up and answer more. But lastly, I always want to leave with that we are currently working on another opportunity of funding through ARPA to make sure that we're giving more services and resources for these small childcare facilities. But that is a high level look at the things that we're doing here at Women's Advancement. And of course, we have a number of partners that we work with, and we're very happy to all come together in the name of supporting Boston's women and specifically the childcare industry. Thank you.
Thank you, Ayana. Next, we have Trin Nguyen.
Thank you.
Workforce Development, welcome.
Thank you. Thank you, Councillor Asabi George. Very good to see you. Thank you, Councillor Mejia, and all the other councillors as well. This is an extremely important topic. We've always wanted to advocate and prioritize it, but unfortunately, we just don't do enough to make the kind of impact that's needed. My colleagues ahead of me have done great work and strides. There needs to be a lot more work to be done. So my presentation is going to focus more on complementary efforts that we have done from workforce development by leveraging resources, partnerships, and funding, but we don't necessarily have the oomph and that power to just really dive into and go to scale like we really want to. And so the presentation will highlight some of those light touches, but by all means, we need to do a deeper dive, scalable, powerful, driving the engine to really bring this to scale and to make the impact that's needed for families and children and workers in the city of Boston. So if you bear with me for 1 second, I'll pull up my my PowerPoint. Can you all see my PowerPoint right now? Great.
But it's also sharing what your other stuff on your, maybe make it full screen.
Okay. I don't have anything.
We can just see the rest of your screen, that's all.
Do you see this? Is this okay? Okay,
Yeah,
great. Thank
perfect.
you. Thank you so much, Counselor. And so this just kind of goes over, I can't see you all and your faces, your expressions, so forgive me. So this just kind of goes over our Office of Workforce Development, Trin Nguyen. I'm the director with many partners that we work here. And this just goes through a list of things that we do cover with the city: job training, career, job search assistance, education, adult education, financial coaching, tax help, and economic supports as well. And this slide just quickly goes through the outcomes and impacts that we've had just last year. All of this is available at our Office of Workforce Development and Office of Financial Empowerment. So both websites have updated resources, publications, outcomes, and programs of two offices as well. And so I'm briefly going to highlight some of the work that we've been doing to support Boston's childcare workforce. And by all means, I think that this is something that we really need to take a deeper dive to make a radical change on. But we did provide technical assistance and financial support for community-centered programs that have childcare focuses. ABCD is very big on its First Step program with this early childhood education. We've funded them through many various sources, including paid internships as well. And then ABCD, again, we've supported them with their career exploration to make sure that they are supporting many careers in the building trades, criminal justice, culinary arts, and especially in early education and care. And so while we support various industries, we also, to the best of our ability, support early education and care as well. And this year we've made a grant of $200,000 to support the Urban College of Boston program. It's a non-traditional private 2-year institutions that work with working moms, students across the city, and having them do more learn and earn models, articulation agreements, using their learning experience to matriculate that into stackable credits with urban colleges and other 2-year programs that lead to 4-year programs with the focus on early childhood educators for the city. The other selected highlights that we have done is that within all of our training programs, we really prioritize and ask people to say, can you team up in order for us to support you in your workforce training? Can you team up with other childcare providers and pay for their childcare? And so we don't have all the funding and the work. We wish we did to support students, participants in training programs and pay for their childcare and support system at the same time. We know that those things are needed so we can have equitable access so residents can fully participate in the job training and education that we provide. But if they don't have if they have those barriers, they can't fully participate. And so we do try to make some of our funding to be flexible enough to pay support and for childcare as well. My colleague, Ayanna, spoke about the city's childcare entrepreneur fund. We've also made a commitment to that fund to ensure that there are technical assistance and grants that are provided to applicants and those agencies that need the grants and financial support so that they can be geared up. Again, what we want to do is utilize and optimize current ecosystems and our nonprofit partners to access some federal resources that came by. All of you know the advanced child care tax credit that came down the pipeline earlier this year. Families were confused on how they should access it. A lot of them couldn't access it because they had to file taxes. And so what we did with our Boston Tax Coalition is that we included that counseling and that training so that when people are doing their taxes, that they can file for their advanced child tax credit into their application or inform them to access it at the same time. They need to file their taxes at least 1 year within the three-year past prior period. And so we did include the ACTC within our tax coalition, which works with approximately 11,000 Boston households every year to bring back $24 million of tax refunds back into families. And so we utilize that scalable system so that families can also access ACTC as well. So the other piece that we have been working with on in the last year, we'd like to continue to do so. And we've had forums and community dialogues with employers. So we've had employer panels, specifically within healthcare, construction, information technology, and also retail. We had employers within those sectors, and we asked them what are best practices and which employers can provide either flexibility for childcare, time off, or employers had to understand that workers had childcare issues and problems. And so bringing those discussions with between employees and then also employers to engage with other of their employer colleagues to say, here are ways and best practices and programs in which employers can start to implement in their own workplaces so that we can fully engage women and workers into the workforce, knowing that they have this childcare issues as part of their daily reality. And so we work with employers to have them understand that employees need support and recognition that there is this problem at home, so that when they come to work, employers understand those challenges. Again, these are only light touches and areas in which, to the best of our ability, we try to integrate childcare into workforce training and employer engagement as well. A lot more work needs to be done, much more work. We're happy to listen and to learn and to see how we can forge all of our resources to really make this happen, particularly around our tuition-free community college, to ensure that we're making education and academic requirements debt-free for those who need those credentials so that they can compete in the field. We also need to know and learn that this is a big legislative advocacy and movement as well. We need to know that workers need to get paid. They need to be respected. It needs to be good paying jobs, good quality jobs with benefits, so that they can have a balanced, structured life to take care of their own children as well. So this is much, the whole industry of childcare is, as you all know, because you're leading this fight, it is much more than a lot of what my colleagues and I have been presenting. It needs to be a statewide movement, the way we did it with $15 minimum wage and paid sick leave. We need to add childcare to that priority list. Happy to learn and be partners with everyone to make this happen. This is long overdue. We've talked about issues for too long, and we need to do something about it. Thank you. And thank you for listening. Happy to take questions.
Thank you very much, Trin, for that presentation. You can stop sharing your screen. Thank you. Councilor Mejia, did you want to go to panel number 2? Or do you have questions with this group first?
I think in the interest of keeping the conversation going, I think that if our colleagues don't mind, if we could go to the second panel, and then we could have a robust conversation with everyone, and it feels everyone is engaged, if that's okay with the administration and others. Is that okay?
That's fine by me. I see some head shaking, so that's good. So we'll next go to Janae McDonald, and then who's the family chair coordinator, a family child care coordinator, SEIU Local 509. Janae, welcome.
Thank you, Madam Chair. As you heard, my name is Janae McDonald. I'm the Family Child Care Coordinator for SEIU Local 509. We're the union that represents over 20,000 human service workers and educators in Massachusetts, with 2,400 family child care providers in our purview, and over 400 of those FCC programs in the Metro Boston area. I'm also on the steering committee for the Common Start Coalition, which filed legislation this year to provide affordable and accessible, high-quality early education and care to promote child development, the well-being, and support the economy and the Commonwealth. And I'm also on the steering committee for the Care That Works Coalition, non-standard hour care pilot, which was launched in Boston. It is a pleasure to be here, and also a relief to hear the continued call by Councilor Mejia and others to continue to beat the drum on the important role that childcare plays for both families and the workers. And I also just want to shed a little light on family childcare programs and what we should keep in mind. And although they're held accountable to EEC, they are not considered state employees. And so that means that they are left with no retirement benefits to opt into from an employer. There's no health insurance covered, and other benefits which would typically come from an employer. Family childcare providers are expected to operate as independent small businesses. Unlike a center-based setting where assistant teachers or assistant classroom teachers, have a career ladder to look forward to, it's not the same for FCCs. They are both the lead teacher, the director, and any other support role that an education setting would need. While they can work to move their way through the state agency's quality rating system, obtain certifications and other higher education degrees, which also involves them incurring more debt, none of that work is reflected in their pay. The union continues to advocate for higher rates, a basic income for FCCs, additional training fund dollars, a healthcare reimbursement fund, which is what we won in our last contract, to help curb the cost of co-pays, medication, other healthcare needs. This pandemic, like many have said, continued to shine a light on an already fragmented childcare system. While about 80% of pre-COVID providers have reopened, we're still facing future capacity challenges in the state. And Boston is actually #1 in the state for losing childcare capacity. The family childcare providers that I represent have dedicated their programs to serving low-income families with service needs, which automatically limits their earning potential. These are the same providers who took on debt in order to pay their bills during COVID-19 closures and in order to restructure their programs so that they could safely reopen. We have been able to see how amiable FCCs really are during this pandemic. Family childcare providers made up a majority of the programs that opted to provide emergency care when everything was shut down so that frontline workers and other essential workers could get to work. We also saw how providers expanded their programs to serve remote learners, and that required them to incur additional cost. We have to invest more in childcare and do more to recruit and retain our FCCs. As you've heard from others saying how the field is 90% or over 90% women, more than half of them are women of color. And this is another reason why equitable pay and solutions is so important. Investing in childcare infrastructure literally translates to the critical steps towards racial justice and equity. And for a little bit more perspective, family childcare providers are providing 10 to 12 hours of care a day. And we're talking about a range of $39 to $71 per child per day reimbursement rate. If you were to break that down according to the hours of operation, and that goes to be about $3 to $7 an hour. So it's unfair to continually demand high quality, right? We heard from other panelists continue to talk about high quality, while we're not adequately compensating providers for investing in their education, their training, and their overall program. While we're thankful for the hours of operation, the maximum hours of operation regulation being removed, childcare providers are still not being made whole. These are groups of women who opt to open their programs early to accommodate the needs of their families' work schedules, yet they don't receive any differential or incentive for their flexibility. Without these types of options, workers in industries of hospitality and building trades, which seems to be a big industry in the Boston area, are not able to sustain their employment. This also decreases the diversity in these industries when it comes to women, women of color who have disproportionately carried the burden of solving their childcare needs so that they can go to work. And so what it means is that we have building trade industries and other industries where women and women of color cannot afford to enter because of the childcare barrier. And that's one of the things that's so special about the Care That Works Coalition non-standard hour care pilot that I mentioned earlier. The pilot has actually taken on the responsibility of sifting out families that are in need of this care, finding FCCs who are willing to participate in this program, and then additionally actually providing that financial incentive stipend for those FCCs who are participating and who are willing to expand their program to meet non-traditional hours. Providers need to be able to cover their basic operating costs in order to keep their doors open and make further investments in providing high quality care for one of our most vulnerable populations, and that's our children. Additionally, it's important to make sure that the burden of cost does not get strapped to the backs of families. A provider would have to maintain maximum enrollment just to keep their head above water with the current reimbursement model. And I want to just take you back to what I mentioned about that coming down to being about $3 to $7 an hour per child per day rate. The city of Boston has made some contributions to the non-standard hour care pilot and the sustainability grants, which we heard about from the Women's Office of Advancement. This is also another reason why the Common Start legislation is so important, which we heard from Ms. Chin talking about the importance to really increase and put the child care infrastructure issue on a higher platform. And the Common Start legislation does just that. But I want to highlight that we don't have to necessarily wait for the state legislation in order to make an impact. The city can, up the ante in sustainability grants for childcare programs and build better on the last application cycle in the ways that they distribute the funds, also in the amount and how they scale the funds. And, I just want to close out my statement by saying, after all, really the Boston economy depends on it. The Massachusetts economy depends on it. And again, thank you for the invitation and thank you for allowing me to come here and share the perspective of family child care providers in the Boston area and throughout Massachusetts.
Thank you very much, Janae. Next, we have Sarah Muncie. Welcome, Sarah.
Thank you. Thank you so much for the opportunity to testify today. And thank you to all of you for your leadership on behalf of the children, families, and teachers of Boston. My name's Sarah Muncie. I'm co-president and chief innovation officer at Neighborhood Villages, a Boston-based nonprofit, and our mission is a high-quality early education and care system that is affordable and accessible to everyone. We work directly with early education providers in Boston to provide solutions for many of the challenges that they face, including professional development, workforce sourcing, operations, and logistics. So much of what you've heard about today, those pain points. To describe what we do in another way, we provide many of the supports that a district would provide for K-12 because our early educators and providers have been left on their own for far too long. Through our work, we support nearly 900 children, 400 providers, and over 1,000 parents and families in the city of Boston. We reach every neighborhood in the city, from Roxbury to the South End and from East Boston to Dorchester. Our demographics are reflective of the city: about 42% Black, about 36% Latinx, 14% white, and about 6% Asian. And it's through this lens that I can definitively tell you that Boston is in the midst of a childcare crisis that is tearing at the fabric of our city. And if we don't fix it soon, we'll be failing another generation of children and families and educators. So our job is big, but every member of this council has spoken about the benefits of early education. The latest research and the science is clear. Children who participate in early learning demonstrate greater levels of educational achievement, higher earnings, better health outcomes, longer lifespans. There's no question that this is the right thing to do. And if we want to close the racial educational achievement gaps in the Boston school system, it starts with making early education available to all. Instead of scrambling to close the achievement gap, we can prevent it. Yet early education is too expensive in Boston, and it's out of reach for too many families. Massachusetts has the second highest cost in the nation for childcare. And for families who can't afford it, the wait lists are really long. In the centers we work with alone, 5 programs have literally thousands of families on the wait list, a large percentage of them for infant seats. Each name on that wait list, each child on that wait list represents a parent, a Bostonian who is ready to work, but cannot find childcare. There are many reasons for this problem, but I'll focus on one, which is why we're here, which is our workforce crisis. We cannot offer the care our kids and parents need because our centers are hemorrhaging staff. Our early education workforce, which as mentioned is 92% women and 41% women of color, is earning as little as $14 an hour. One study found that 44% of child care teachers who have recently experienced food insecurity. We aren't competing for staff with other education centers. We're losing them to Dunkin' Donuts, who pays higher wages. One teacher at one of our partner schools, Alice in Jamaica Plain, whose executive director you'll hear from in a few minutes, Tasha Jackson, told me a few weeks ago how much she loves her job, but said she may have to leave it because she wants to have a family of her own and can't afford to. Think about that. In Boston, you have to choose a career to take care of other people's children, and it means you can't afford to have children of your own. It's unacceptable. And the problems are more acute in the city of Boston than some other places in the Commonwealth. Many of our educators cannot afford to live in the city, so they have to pay extra for transportation to come in from other places, for parking. It's made being an early educator in Boston more difficult than almost anywhere in the entire nation. With a lack of staff, many childcare centers have been forced to close. And for those that remain open, they don't have staff to fill classrooms. It's left us with 10% fewer seats than before the pandemic. As Tasha was telling me about the difficult decisions ahead of her, we were sitting next to an unfilled classroom with a wait list, but there's just no teachers. So these are some of the challenges. And the question is, what can we and what can you as the city council do about them? And as a city, we think it starts with declaring once and for all that early education and care is a public good and treating it as such. We have to raise wages, plain and simple. It'll require state investments at the city level, the state level, and the federal level. But fortunately, help is on the way through Build Back Better, and on the state level through the Common Start legislation, which you've heard so much about. We need the city council to support Build Back Better and support the Common Start legislation vocally and emphatically. While we raise wages, we also need to dramatically increase the number of people who enter the field. Neighborhood Villages has partnered with the Department of Early Education and Care and all the community colleges in the Commonwealth for the Professional Pathways program that offers free credit-bearing college courses in 4 languages to any early educator in the state for free. The program's been accessed by hundreds of Bostonians so far, and it will serve hundreds more in the coming year, not only people in Boston, but all across the state. We hope the city will continue to support initiatives like this that make training free so folks don't have debt along with their degrees. And we want to make sure that the educators in Boston know about all these free programs. Finally, for the early educators we need to do all we can to keep them. It starts with keeping them safe. That's why we run free weekly pooled COVID testing for any program in the Commonwealth. Teachers need to feel safe, and they need infrastructure built around them to keep them safe. We hope the council will continue and the city will continue to build infrastructure around our programs. These are just a few of the many steps we can take, and at Neighborhood Villages, we're happy to partner in any way we can. We urge the council and everyone here today to seize this very exciting moment, and thank you for having me.
Thank you very much, Sarah, for joining us and for your presentation. Next, we have Lauren Cook, Ellis. Hi, Lauren.
Hi, everybody. Thank you for inviting me. I'm going to read, I apologize, but I promise to do it as realistically as possible. So as everyone said, my name is Lauren Cook, and I'm the CEO of Ellis Early Learning, a nonprofit early education provider based in the South End and Jamaica Plain. Rare in this sector, Ellis is economically integrated, with 2/3 of our families receiving government subsidies to afford childcare, and the remaining third with the means to pay full tuition. Ellis is nationally accredited, putting us in the top 9% of early education providers in the country. Founded in 1885, we are beloved in the community and have a long wait list due to our high level of quality and our wonderfully diverse learning environment. We have nearly 75 educators serving 21 early education classrooms, including 2 community-based UPK classrooms. And we serve over 250 infants through 5-year-olds. We also have a small school-age program that serves 26 children. Ellis is an example of what Boston can be, a place where barriers are broken down and children from all backgrounds receive the same excellent education. By all accounts, Ellis is a preeminent early education provider in the city. But today, I'm going to be sharing a side of our operations that I typically don't. And while I'm speaking for Ellis today, I will share that I'm in regular touch with some of the city's largest and most well-regarded early education providers, and their struggles are similar. Our workforce is suffering, and as a result, so are the children and families we serve. While I won't spend time on this today, I do want to remind us that the research and brain science is clear. Early educators are teaching children at the most critical time of brain growth and development. There is no better investment that we can make for the city of Boston than an early childhood education. Ellis has 13 teacher vacancies right now, and we have 1 classroom in our JP Center that we've never been able to open due to lack of staff, which Sarah Muncie just mentioned. Not only do we have no teachers, but we have no applicants. I'm not exaggerating. We have no qualified applicants for these positions, or if there is one, we can't afford them. This is a workers' market. There are so many employers hiring and paying well. Amazon and Costco are paying $18 to $25 an hour. Ellis currently pays teachers $15 to $21 per hour, which has been competitive in the field. Fortunately, some ARPA relief funding through EEC will help us do more for our staff this year, but that funding is temporary, and we need a permanent influx of funding in this sector to attract and maintain a qualified workforce. Early educator jobs were hard before the pandemic. Unlike K-12 teachers, early educators work 12 months per year without school vacations or summer break, and they work all day long from 8 to 6 p.m. Their jobs include teaching, wiping noses, changing diapers, de-escalating meltdowns, feeding, burping, cleaning up messes, planning and executing fun and engaging activities, bundling kids up to play outside, unbundling them when they return inside, tying shoes, drying tears, taking the calls from mothers checking in, taking photos to share with families, observing the children to ensure they're on track to reach their milestones, helping children with critical social skills like learning to share and being gentle, getting children ready for kindergarten, and literally keeping everyone safe all the time. the job is exhausting. Not only is the job exhausting, but it pays peanuts, and it always has. Now we're in the middle of a global pandemic, and there is real public health risk inherent to working in the field with a primarily unvaccinated child population. It is no mystery why there is a workforce crisis impacting childcare. Only when we can pay the skilled and qualified professionals what they deserve to commit to this challenging work will we have applicants and a consistent workforce. And let me be clear, teacher turnover hurts everyone. It hurts teachers themselves by making the jobs of those that stay even harder. Now, not only do our teachers have to support the children, they need to support whomever is helping out in the classroom. As I'm speaking to you today, our front desk person, development assistant, and communications manager are all in classrooms covering for missing staff. And our finance associate is at the front desk answering the phones and buzzing people through the front door. One of our best infant teachers of over 7 years recently resigned with no notice due to the stress of inconsistency in her classroom, coupled with the stress of the pandemic. This is not sustainable. Teacher turnover also hurts children. Research shows that consistent caregivers are key to obtaining positive outcomes in kids. Consistent teachers get to know children almost as well as their own parents. They know how to manage their young students' stress, challenge them, and make them laugh and shriek in delight. And finally, teacher turnover also hurts families. Parents want to know and trust their child's teachers. They want to know their kids are in the capable hands of qualified early educators. Right now, our children are in the hands of suffering teachers, and not enough of them. Teachers are trapped in poverty-like lifestyles due to low wages. Teachers are stressed by pandemic life and the challenges of demanding work for little pay. This isn't fair to our teachers, and it's not fair to the children we serve. Childcare sits at the intersection of every issue that the city of Boston cares about improving, including housing. It's too expensive to live in or near Boston on an early ed salary. Transportation, it's too expensive to park near Ellis. Educational equity, economic mobility, social justice, and racial justice. Did I mention that 90% of Ellis teachers are women of color? Considering the depth of challenges the workforce and sector faces, it's truly incredible the level of joy and growth we're able to achieve for the children we serve. Our teachers are actually miracle workers. My colleagues who have been in the field for decades say it has never been this bad. And honestly, it keeps getting worse. It feels like another person resigns every 2 weeks, all for different, understandable reasons. Last week, we lost an amazing teacher to be a paraprofessional at the Sumner School in Roslindale, where she'll make $5 more per hour. Who can blame her? There is a solution to the childcare problem, though, but it will take political will at every level to fix it. The answer is simply increase funding to the sector. Right now, even colleges are seeing a drop in early education interest because it's so widely known how dismal the pay is. In fact, some early education programs are no longer being offered at all. The pipeline is dry. To attract new talent to the field and retain the good teachers that we do have, we need to pay people what they deserve. They need to be able to afford life in Boston and have a positive, manageable work experience everyone is entitled to. Thank you so much for hearing me today.
Thank you very much, Lauren. And next we have Kristen McSwain. Kristen, welcome.
Thank you, Chairwoman Asabi George, and thank you, Councilor Mejia, for convening this really important conversation about early education and the childcare workforce. I'm going to try and build on the comments of my fellow panelists so that we can get to the question period of today. But I did want to let you know that the Boston Opportunity Agenda convenes the Birth 8 Collaborative in Boston, which represents parents and more than 200 representatives from early education centers, family child care, nonprofit organizations, schools, public health, philanthropy, and our medical institutions. And together, we're working to ensure that all young children are ready for sustained success in kindergarten and beyond. Based on our last 10 years of work in early childhood, we believe that there can be no equitable recovery without an intentional and sizable investment in early child care workforce and the early child care ecosystem. And I think you've heard comments relating to that today. The couple of points I'd like to make that we haven't covered is that early education is an essential infrastructure for our healthy economy. COVID-19 revealed to the entire country what early education and care has known for years. Childcare is the backbone of our economy. According to the Massachusetts Taxpayer Foundation, the heavy loss of women in the workforce over this past year and a half, including those who've stopped seeking employment, is due to the drop in childcare capacity in the Commonwealth. And yet, we know that women's participation in the labor force is a key driver for economic growth. In order to recover, Boston has to invest both our general funds and our ARPA dollars to work on the longstanding and worsening childcare shortage. We have to invest in our educators who lead and staff classrooms. We know from the other testimony given today that these are challenges that we've been facing for a long time. Our report on the availability of childcare in 2017, for example, said that 1/3 of families in Boston did not have access to the childcare that they wanted. Fast forward to 2021. On top of that, we've got an additional 21% decrease in the total number of licensed child care center and family child care providers. What that means for the average family in Boston is that half of the families looking for child care can't find it. And that is before we get to the challenge that we're talking about right now. All of the positions that we've been talking about previously are licensed childcare positions that aren't able to be filled, right? Classrooms that don't have teachers can't have children in them, and those are what's licensed. So that shortage in childcare providers and the workforce exacerbates what's already short for licensed childcare to begin with. I know we've talked about the diversity of our early education workforce, but I want to give some statistics that come from a 2019 survey that the UMass Boston Center did. 40% of our center-based educators reported worrying about having enough money for food. 67 report not being able to pay their monthly bills. 33% of educators reporting using at least one public benefit on a yearly basis. So this is a status that was already in place before COVID that has been exacerbated by COVID, and all of the daily challenges that Lauren outlined in her comments about the challenges that the workforce is facing in the classroom. Despite all of that, early educators are among the most vital workers in the city of Boston's social infrastructure. We need to support them in the following ways in order to be sure that we are able to have a workforce who can show up and report to work, where their children are in safe places and the educators who are working with them are justly compensated for the work that they do. A couple of recommendations we would make is to expand the City of Boston Child Care Entrepreneur Fund. The fund that Ayanna spoke to has been doing great work in ensuring not only the stability of family child care, but also the onboarding of new providers into the family child care community. We need to expand other small business supports to include child care providers. Because it's such a regulated industry, many of them don't find their way to the resources available for other small businesses. How can we make connections to the mentoring, technical assistance, small business loans that they need in order to be successful? We need to, as you've heard today, support the existing child care workforce, both center-based and family child care, by using funds to augment teacher compensation or provide loan forgiveness to build a sustainable local workforce that is compensated fairly for their important work. This could be modeled on the UPK endowment that Tiara talked about, or on the tuition-free community college program that was started by the Office of Workforce Development. It is critical for the City Council to be supporting the Common Start legislation and the Build Back Better legislation. But in the meantime, we need to be ensuring that our workforce is not incurring debt as they enter these what are currently low-paid positions. And anything we can do to incentivize them entering debt-free enables them to be able to make a better living for themselves and their families while we're waiting for these larger pieces of legislation to pass. The next thing we need to do is invest in attracting new talent to the childcare workforce. Lauren specifically talked about this pipeline that has dried up, but we know that there are other places where we are doing parent leadership programs, where folks are taking on leadership in their community and care deeply about education and children. So working with the Office of Workforce Development, Mass Hire, our institutions of higher education and others, we need to build another set of employment pathways from parent leadership and development programs to full-time positions across the early childhood ecosystem. Some of that work can be based on the work of neighborhood villages, but also on the work that Care Institute is doing with JVS and the work of ABCD. The next recommendation we have is that you continue to do the kind of work that Janae focused on, meeting the needs of essential workers who don't hold traditional working hours by providing financial incentives to centers and FCCs to remain open during non-traditional work hours. There's a sizable number of parents who work on the night shift or have unpredictable schedules and wages, and childcare is a major weak point for them and is a source of stress and instability. So in concert with increasing the supply of childcare offered during non-traditional hours, we need to lift up best practices for care in the evening and overnight programs that we do have. And then lastly, all of the things that we've been talking about have a direct impact on our children. And we need to expand the implementation of developmental screening in childcare settings so that we know what's happening with our young people. We're connecting them and their families to developmental supports, and if needed, to special education or early intervention, so that we can move forward in our recovery in a just and equitable way. Thank you.
Thank you very much, Kristen. I think that's everybody for presentations this afternoon. I first want to just say thank you to all of you who have presented today, and thank you to your staff and your organizations and those caregivers that are doing very important work educating our youngest kids. I also want to note, Kristen, just based on that Common Start legislation comment, I believe that we, I texted this to ask the question, that we did pass a resolution as a statement of our city council's support of that Common Start legislation, but agree with you, we've got so much more work to do. I've got just a couple of questions that I'll save till after the lead sponsor asks her questions and my colleagues do. So Councilor Mejia.
Thank you, Councilor Asabi George, and also just thank you so very much to everyone who literally showed up, not just showing up, but like came here with so much great knowledge and advocacy. We already know what we need to do. Now the question is how we're going to get it done. And I'm so enthusiastic and encouraged by the steps that you have laid forth. And now we got our marching orders. But I do have a few questions. Some will be for the administration, and then some for our advocates. So just in the interest of keeping time, I'm going to be as quickly as possible. So if we could just go right into for the BPS folks, can you just tell me quickly a little bit more about your program-wide salary increase metrics? Like, what does that look like? And how are you working directly with providers and advocates like SEIU 509 to engage in this work?
Want to do that one?
Yeah, so programs receive $11K per child. That's in addition to additional funding that can be braided. And they create the budget. The community base creates the budget and uses it how they wish. We require that they pay I mentioned the teacher is 58. The associate teacher can be no lower than 34. The program director is 61. And then we require an increased stipend for family engagement, assistant director, and executive positions. However, as programs move up on a quality threshold, again, they can use their budget however they like. So, Boys and Girls Club or an Ellis can say, we want to pay both of our co-teachers $58K, or they can say, we want to apply for the equity fund because we want to address turnover and we want to use $30K for staff retention. So we really give programs the flexibility to determine how they want to spend their funding. We just require a minimal for salaries. Did I answer your question?
Yeah, can you also just talk a little bit about how you are engaging advocates and providers like SEIU 509 to help with that decision-making process? Do you engage other stakeholders in this conversation to inform your thinking?
I mean, so we have a governance model. So to answer your question, we're not currently engaging the groups that you just mentioned. We do have a governance model. So that includes our advisory committee, that includes a family council, and that includes our community-based organizations. But there's no one outside of that governance model currently that we're engaging.
The only thing I would add, the only thing that I would add is that the money goes, you have to turn off the, you got it? Okay, sorry about that. Is that the way the funding goes, it goes directly to the program so that they can negotiate with their staff, their own rates and their own salaries. So we really leave it at the community-based provider because we can't kind of dictate how every program should pay their staff. That's where we set bars and then put requirements of educational requirements, and that they use the quality curriculum and that they use the coaching. And then we partner with them to build the best strategy with them. But it's really done one program at a time to assure the quality. You know, BTU and SCI, really, they're two different unions, and I think that's one of the things that there should be some discussion because they have two different bargaining strategies, and that's something that is worth thinking through in the long run on this. But again, that's really at the community-based level, and I believe most community-based programs do not have union center-based unions. I think one or two do, but the majority it's just negotiated with a bargaining agreement at that program.
Thank you for that, Jason. And I'm going to be quick because I know my colleagues are also waiting for questions. So I think what I'm going to just go into one more question for the administration, and then I'm going to ask a few for the advocates. You know, we know that the pay for childcare workers, it's not where it needs to be, especially when it comes to the amount of work that they put in. And I'm just curious, how are we advocating on the city side of things for better pay for childcare workers, those who aren't employed through UPK? And what funding did we use throughout the pandemic to help early childhood educators? Just curious if you could tell us about that. And then the other question is how, as a city, are we advocating for healthcare options for early childhood educators?
So is this for BPS UPK folks, or is this for the other administrators?
Both. One is, I think that Jason, you could answer the UPK one, and then I'd like Trin to talk to us a little bit about what we can do to help support, or the women advancement folks to talk a little bit about providing healthcare.
Well, so from the BPS perspective, you know, this was a disruptive influence. We basically stepped in and said, you got to pay your staff. And there was a fair amount of resistance in the beginning, but I think over time, people have really seen it, even though it's challenging, as a benefit. So I think really it's just the city stepping in and saying, this is what workers really need. This is what high quality instruction should look like. And therefore you should pay for it, and being flexible enough to work with each agency to make it work. And so I would think that that would be a good model to think through for non-UPK programs as well. We also did use the kind of negotiation of the BTU because it's a starting salary of the Boston Teachers Union beginning teacher. So I do think, you know, that's sort of the combination of those two should be thought through. But then also it's with the instructional requirements come the use of a strong curriculum, coaching supports, other comprehensive services. So I guess I would just say that's a lesson to be learned. And then what you see clearly is that turnover is much lower, and that you do get much more stability and high quality instruction and stronger outcomes.
Yeah, thank you for that, Jason. Okay, so if Trin or women or Yana from Women Advancement, the question in regards to advocating for healthcare options, and while I have you there, I'm just also curious about, there are a lot of immigrants that come to this country, and I'm just curious about the pipeline and how we're creating the pipeline to get them into this profession.
I can jump in. I know for us, we haven't specifically taken that deeper dive into the healthcare aspect, but I do know when it comes to looking at pay, when, with our ARPA opportunities, we are looking at ways to support childcare facilities and bringing back their employees and making sure that they have the funding to either increase or give other financial assistance to help transition them back into the workplace, to increase those seats, to increase those opportunities for them to thrive in that industry. So that's something that is in process that we're looking forward to distributing out to the community. But I do know when we're thinking about our immigrant community here in Boston, that's something that we've been really cognizant of, because we understand that there are so many folks that are coming here looking for different opportunities. And especially with our Childcare Entrepreneur Fund, that being our largest program right now, we see folks from many walks of life. So I know we constantly engage with those who have completed the program to understand how we can get in contact with more people in their community and have them be an ambassador of sorts of the things that we're doing here at Women's Advancement and with the community you see on this hearing right now, because I know in different capacities we all work together. So if I know that there's something going on with workforce development, I make sure to connect them, and we make sure whatever we have currently, we work together. But I know for certain we look at those gaps and see how we can reassess and evolve from there.
Thank you. Trin?
Yeah, just quickly. I mean, we do support any legislation that comes down the pipeline through letters of support, testimony, and really advocating with the administration. We do use a portion of our fund, our training dollars, which is not that flexible to support childcare workers. But I have to admit that we just don't do enough. So love to hear more on how we can obtain additional resources so that we can be better partners. So that's where we're coming from. We'd love to do more.
Yeah, thank you. I appreciate that. And so I'm just going to add 2 questions for the advocates. I'm just curious, there seems to be a disconnect between the cost of childcare, and everybody knows that Massachusetts has the most expensive childcare in the country, but the cost of childcare never seems to make its way into the pockets of our childcare workers. And so I'm just curious, how do you all feel as a city that what we can do to change that? And do you feel that the solution is to empower workers to start their own centers, or to find ways to empower providers with their current workplaces? Just curious from those who have been in the front lines doing this work.
I'm happy to just real quickly say one short thing, which is that this is a broken business model. Nobody's making money off of this. We're trying to pretend it's like a health club where we can have more members. There's no money. So nobody's making money off of it. And the programs which Lauren Cook can speak to so eloquently have to make these really tough decisions, right? About even keeping their doors open and fixing the boiler and all of these other things, like facilities that K-12 sort of gets the privilege of spending time and struggling with and concentrating on. And childcare, it's just about wages. And I think while there are Band-Aids we can try to do as a city, this is a public good. We need a huge infusion of money from the state via Common Start or the country via Build Back Better to really meaningfully raise wages. Because when we give 6 months, 1 year, when we tell programs, we'll give you this little Band-Aid, they can't commit to their teachers that they can raise their wages for a long term. So they just don't do it. Because you don't want to create a dissatisfier. So I'll let Lauren and others speak to the nitty gritty, but just wanted to throw out there that it's just, if we zoom up 1,000 feet, it is just such a broken business model. There's nothing that we're selling that we can raise the price of. It's like, but the thing about it is that 7th grade's the same way. If we tried to make 7th grade pay for itself, it'd be the same way. So I think we need to be big and bold and loud about the fact that this is a public good that's not going to be fixed creatively. Like it needs to be a system.
I want to chime in and, I echo everything that Sarah just said. But however, from the FCC standpoint, and this is not going to be necessarily a popular standpoint, right? So we know that the system is broken. We understand that all programs, both center-based and FCCs, are strapped for finances because they need to be funded better. But as the union that helps negotiate with its members for higher rates and for other benefits, one of the things that came to light was the discrepancies in the contract between the state agency and the childcare systems, which act as an intermediary for some family childcare programs of both payment and then some other services. So these systems are, there to supposed to be business support that you heard a lot of people talk about being able to offer family childcare providers because they are operating as independent businesses and are working constantly to get the skills they need to be able to operate their programs. But unfortunately, some of the systems are unfortunately operating more like employers of the FCCs, and they're not. And so one of the things that came to light when we negotiated our last contract was there are certain additional rates and payments that are being made for the contract between the state agency and the system for servicing, whether it's like young parents or at-risk youth, et cetera. And so what we found is some of the systems give a very small amount of that to their FCC because the FCC is the actual one on the front line doing the work. So if there's an additional $17.22 per child per rate for servicing a teen parent, for servicing a homeless family or some other service need, some systems are giving anywhere from $1 to $3 of that extra $17.22 to the family child care provider. And some systems aren't giving anything. And so one of the things that I want to highlight is that nuance. Yes, we know the industry, that 30,000 foot, there's an issue, but there are some things that can be done in the meantime to make sure that the women that are actually doing the work get those funds.
To that point, what would that be? Like in terms
that
of
would be that, what we discovered, what would need to happen is that the contract, either between the system and the state agency, would have to be reconstructed so that either all of that or part of that money or more of it would go to the FCC, or that we would ask the systems to do the morally and ethically right thing and to give more of that money directly to the FCC because they are the one servicing that child and family.
Oh, y'all heard it here. People paying attention. Is what we need to do. I'm curious if any other advocates. I know, Councillor Asabi George, that we usually have 7 minutes, and I don't want to overextend my time, but I'm happy to come back for another round. But I think we've heard loud and clear where we need to go. At least my questions were answered, so I feel pretty good for now.
Great. Thank you, Councillor Mejia. Councillor Braden, do you have any questions for the group today?
Thank you. Thank you all the panelists for great presentations. I think you've once again raised up many of the concerns that we have had, for a long, long time. And we are in a crisis. One question I had with regard to onboarding new entrepreneurs. Is anyone looking at cooperative childcare initiatives that parents could develop in partnership with? Is anyone looking at cooperative childcare? That's really another option. I think we need to look at any and all options in terms to develop this infrastructure.
I can jump in, Councillor. I know with the Childcare Entrepreneur Fund, when we do look at how we structured it in the beginning, co-ops were an option for that, but I do know the feedback that we did receive is that a lot of the aspiring and current providers had difficulty with establishing that. So I know right now we've just been looking at the current aspiring family childcare businesses, but I know that we've taken that into consideration on how we can evolve since we've gotten that feedback that the co-ops have been difficult to, to establish.
Yeah. Is there any particular barrier to what is the issue with regard to co-ops?
At least for the conversations around the Childcare Entrepreneur Fund, I know particularly they precede my time with Women's Advancement, but I do know I speak with our partners that are a part of this hearing right now, and I know we're going to have a deeper dive into how we can make sure that that is more accessible.
Yeah, because for some particular groups, especially immigrant groups, or I know in our district out here we have lots of religious minorities, like the Orthodox Jewish community, where childcare is a major issue, and thinking about co-ops might be a creative way to help get those women into the workforce again. So I think, I look forward to maybe picking this up and having a further conversation outside of this meeting. And then the family,
Councillor Breeden, I just wanted to say that one of the things that I've heard recently when co-ops are brought up is that you do need some flexibility in parent schedule. It used to be such a popular, way for folks to band together. Folks don't have as much when they do get a work schedule now. It's quite often that they can't take that one day every other week or so, that, a co-op sort of has you there. So I know that has come up just as a problem, that there isn't as much flexibility in parent scheduling.
Yeah, but maybe COVID, one of the things that COVID has maybe taught us that we need to be flexible in all sorts of ways we never would have imagined a few years ago. So maybe it's an opportune moment to try and think about that. The other issue I had was in relation to, and this is maybe a question I need to take up with the BPDA, is that when we're building residential housing, that spaces within buildings should be designed to be family friendly, and potential childcare spaces that I think that's another issue, that for many folks who live in apartment buildings or that in terms of family childcare, that they're very restricted in terms of the space that's available. Is that something that you're encountering with onboarding new potential childcare providers, especially in the family side?
One thing I wanted to say about that, one of the issues that we've seen as it relates to either buildings or landlords or budding entrepreneurs who do not own their home is that some landlords do not want them to have a family child care program. And it may be for some of that reason, but one of the main reasons that we've heard is the liability. But one of the things that we have to spend a lot of time trying to get our member leaders to educate these property owners on is that our family child care providers actually have liability insurance. And so I think it would be really helpful. I don't know if there's some sort of education that can be done with landlords or property owners, or some sort of campaign that can be run so that they understand that, and it doesn't feel like our family child care providers are being discriminated against, for being able to run their business, rightfully so, with liability insurance, and really understanding that the property manager doesn't have to take on that liability. So that's one of the things that we've seen as it relates to family child care providers who don't own their home.
Very good. Thank you, Madam Chair, and thank you all for your presentations this afternoon. And I look forward to continuing this conversation.
Thank you, Councilor Braden. I think those are some excellent questions. I don't think we have Councilor Flynn or Councilor Flaherty with us anymore. I've got a couple of quick questions for the Boston Public Schools for UPK. I'm curious, my three questions are, how many 4-year-olds are there in the city of Boston? Do we know that number? And then what is the goal for 3-year-olds for next year? You had talked about the administration's hope to increase that number for 3-year-olds. And then my last question is, because we talked a lot about it, what's the difference between a co-teacher, I understand a lead teacher, co-teacher, and an assistant teacher?
So the first question was in regards to 4-year-olds. What we use is the K2, BPS K2 enrollment number. So we look at how many children enroll in Boston Public Schools for K2.
Do we know how many students, how many 4-year-olds there are in the city of Boston?
So we know both the census numbers and then we also know birth records, but they're not as perfect. That's why we tend to use the K2 numbers, because at least we know those who use a free public service. That's kind of been the logic to it. But the census is usually is lower, and then birth records are usually higher. But it's usually around 6,000, just to kind of give you a sense. But it's about 4,000 that use the BPS, give or take, a couple hundred here and there, depending on the year. So that's the first question. Then
yeah, and just to finish that, so if we use that number 4,000, and we have 3,200 seats currently through our community-based and the Boston Public Schools, so that tells you what we believe to be the gap that we're working to fill. Mm-hmm. However, and again, that's census data from years ago. So we need to look at what's currently in Boston for 4-year-olds. To your question about 3-year-olds, Mayor Janey allowed us to do a small expansion of 25%, and then we're going to propose to continue to expand. We have allowed each program to tell us what kind of model they want so they can grade 3- and 4-year-olds in their classrooms. We do have some standalone 3-year-old rooms, but our plan is to assess the need and expand as much as the mayors are willing to allow us to do. Then your third question was about the difference between a lead teacher, co-lead teacher, and a teacher associate. And again, those are really titles. For us, you'll see across community-based organizations that it varies, but our requirement is a bachelor's degree, and you'll see it varies. So you'll have like a Boys and Girls Club that has 2 co-lead teachers. It means they both have a bachelor's degree, and they both make that salary. Where you might go to another program that has a lead teacher and they have the bachelor's degree, but the associate teacher has an associate's degree. So it's really about the qualifications that has determined whether they label them as a lead teacher or a co-lead teacher. Did that answer your question?
It does. Thank you very much. So I don't have any additional questions. Councilor Mejia, do you have additional questions? And we do have someone signed up for public testimony, which as your I'll promote Dennis Kirkpatrick to panelist if he's here with us to offer testimony. But in the meantime, Councilor Mejia is the lead sponsor. Do you have additional questions or follow-up comment?
Yeah, I just wanted to quickly just get a better handle. I'm wondering if any of the advocates have any thoughts or feedback about what they've heard from the administration. Any questions that you have, would just love to give you all an opportunity to ask any questions or share any comments. I'll use my time to give to you all.
One thing I'll just throw out there is that that programs can speak to is that when you do have UPK classrooms in your program, it sort of highlights how much of a public good this is, because you do see stark differences between the resources available to that UPK classroom, everything, from pay to coaching, et cetera, and the rest of the folks in the building. So, my dream is that one day we'll be looking at this like really holistically, because we do ask childcare, particularly center-based care, to really piece together their classrooms in sort of an unnatural way, not unnatural, but figuring out, who's going to be in each classroom based on which dollars can be used for those children. It's a really hard way to run a childcare center. So that's just one thing I'll throw out there, is that we need these programs, this partnership with BPS, these community programs. And so I'm not suggesting we don't have those. If we can find a way to really bring the rest of the classrooms in a building up to that level of resourcing, that would be a really beautiful thing.
Wonderful. Anyone else for an additional comment before we go to Dennis? And then we can certainly circle back one more time. Kristen, go ahead, and then we'll go to Dennis.
I think that the only thing that I would add on is that for a long time, this hasn't been an issue that the city has dug into deeply. We've seen work in UPK. The work that MOA has been doing the last couple of years is really amazing and transformative. But there are a lot of things that the city could be doing in addition to what's happening at the state and the federal level. And so, part of, I think, the benefit of this conversation is you all seeing what the issues are by those who are experiencing them, but also really thinking about the leadership role that the city council and the mayor can play together to be working on this issue at both the city level, the state level, and then also the federal level. So I thank you for the conversation. And I just hope you continue to think about the role that you can play, because I think it is quite substantial, and one that all of us would, partner with you to continue to move forward.
Thank you very much, Kristen. And I'd like to go to Dennis Kirkpatrick for remarks. Welcome, Dennis.
Hi, thank you very much, Counselor. Try to be as brief as possible. We're very fortunate to have been running an operation inside the BCYF Rosendale Community Center. Unfortunately, about 2 weeks before the COVID shutdowns, the building suffered a devastating flood, and it will not reopen again until late January. By then, our childcare program and preschool will have been closed 2 years. The good news is we're hoping to reopen. We're going to have to relicense and get all of our ducks in a line. Good news is that at least 2 of my former employees that I had to lay off are willing to come back, because where they're working now, they're actually making less than what I was offering. Even then, we are nowhere near the pay scale that Boston Public Schools have been asking us for. We were solicited to be a part of universal pre-K, but it was just a physical impossibility for us to meet those salary requirements and a number of other conditions. And so we continued along. I would agree that we have a problem retaining people in this field. Getting somebody who wants to use this career as a permanent job, you may as well be looking for unicorns. Finding somebody that wants to work regular, full-time in this, it's a calling, and they really don't stay with it. Most of our younger people come in, some of them are in, college courses for child psychology. They stay with us for a few years for the experience, then they move on. One of the things that was touched base on was the qualifications. I'd point out that the Department of Early Education and Care publishes specific qualifications, but within the last 48 hours, communication came from the commissioner's office that they're going to be relaxing some of the qualifications so they can get some more people into the field. And Councilor George, I sent that to your email and also to Shane's email. You can look through that. One of the things we have to be very careful of is grant monies and funding. One of the things we learned from our partnership with the State Department of Early Education and Care and their interpretation of the regulations is that you cannot use any of the monies for direct child care subsidy. That would be considered a benefit to the parent. It would change their income level, and it would therefore change how much their co-payment is, if anything. And again, the cost of running the program, of course, and the salary levels is a big problem. 99.9% of our clientele is people that are on child care subsidies. We have to subsist on the money that comes from the Commonwealth of Massachusetts. The amount of private pay families can be counted on less than one hand. And so our salaries that we can pay our people are commensurate with the amount of money that we get from the state. We are essentially a program on a fixed income. Hopefully some of the ARPA funds can be used. The only grant that we've ever been able to get so far, because we live in a BCYF facility, has been something known as a CORE grant, C-O-R-E. And we actually were able to use that to offset some of our salaries. Unfortunately, we've been closed for a while and we're going to have to start again. So that's one of the things we have to consider. There's probably a disparity between what the state regulations tell us and what the city is hoping to do. And I think that has to be looked into. Finding childcare obviously is going to be a problem. One of the problems that we had prior to the pandemic, and this goes back to 2019, and I speak mostly from my experience in 2019, was just getting the children to a licensed child care center. Councilor George, I had actually met with your staff probably about 2-3 years ago on this, and we didn't get any relief from Boston Public Schools. Essentially, BPS only has alternative transportation, and as a result, you can't get the children to the preferred child care service. It's a serious problem. We had to give up maybe about 10 families from being in our child care service. We were aware of at least one family, or two actually, where the mother was granted the opportunity from her employer to leave work, go pick up her children halfway across the city, bring them to our child care center, and then return to work. This alone compromised her agreement with EEC because she had to work a certain number of hours per week or per month. Otherwise, her child care voucher would be compromised. So there's a lot of disparities and systems that are not talking to each other. Finally, I'd like to just put out there, cost of education. I agree. There is very few colleges running early child care or early education programs. If you're lucky, you might see one at Roxbury Community College once per year. Urban College maybe once per year. And of course, it's usually about $800, which on the current salary levels, your employees cannot afford. We were fortunate to have some donated funds where we were actually able to pay for some of our employees to get the initial training to increase their quality, their teacher qualifications, which, by the way, part of that commissioner's memo that just came out, some of that TQ, teacher qualification, is being relaxed. In fact, it's being basically pushed to the side. Worth noting, I don't fault the Department of Early Education and Care for a lot of the changes we're going through. One of the problems is that a lot of their funding comes from the federal government. And as the old saying goes, there's no such thing as free money. And the federal government put a lot of strings, if not a whole ball of yarn, onto the federal money that's being distributed to the various programs. That has forced the state to completely revamp, revise, and replace all of their websites, all of their interactive programs and communications devices that we work with. It put new qualifications onto us. For example, we have to do our own Corey and Sorry check, which is more stringent than the cities. And we have to pay for that out of pocket. This includes fingerprinting, and I even have to do that to 15-year-olds that come in as junior counselors in our summer program. Finally, I just wanted to say I heard a lot today about various programs, various funds that might be available. I am unaware of these. I'm out in the field and maybe I'm out of the loop, but we need a comprehensive list of these so that we can go through these and find out where the help is and where we can get it and to what extent and what the qualifications are. Because during the pandemic, I questioned several of these program funding options and various grants that are out there. And we had been under an impression that we might resume much earlier than we were going to. And unfortunately, for one or more reasons, we never qualified. But based on what I'm hearing today, there might be a lot of help that we can get. And we're just completely ignorant of that. And I think that's going to be a part of the solution.
Great. Thank you very much, Dennis. And I don't know whether that string from that ball of yarn is because I've got a wall of yarn behind me. I thank you for your remarks and sharing your experience. Certainly, it's important that we're able to communicate and share information, especially with between the city and the organizations that are run here and affiliated with the city of Boston. I know Lauren and then Trent both raised their hands. Lauren? Oh, you're on mute still, Lauren.
Oops, sorry, thank you. I just wanted to add a little add to Dennis's testimony, if that's okay, with regard to transportation and subsisting on subsidies. So Ellis owned a bus and we provided transportation to our children with open DCF cases because that's part of our contract with DCF. So we have between 10 and 20% of our kids with open DCF contract, open DCF cases. We are obligated to provide transportation. Owning and operating a bus and doing transportation was so hard. It was impossibly hard. We sold our bus this year. We could not find a bus driver. We could not find a bus monitor. We had a bus that constantly needed repairs. It was so expensive to maintain. Where do we park the bus? I just have to say transportation is a complete nightmare. And it's a very interesting point that Dennis brought up, because if there is a way for the city to support transportation, I think that is an interesting thing to explore. So we sold our bus and instead we're offering monthly T-passes to our families for whom we're responsible to get to Ellis. Fortunately, we're centrally located. We haven't lost a lot of our DCF families, but I can tell you attendance drops way down when the weather is bad. And we would have those kids if we had our transportation, but we just literally could not continue to operate transportation. It was too hard. And I don't know how Dennis does it and organizations that subsist on subsidies. Ellis has 2/3 of our families with subsidies and 1/3 who pay privately. Even our private pay rates, they aren't fully covering the cost of their own kids because it would be outrageously expensive. We try to be reasonable because we're a nonprofit. We raise over $1 million a year to maintain status quo, and you heard how hard it is here. So that's with over $1 million of philanthropic dollars supplementing our budget that we're getting, the tuition that we're getting from the Commonwealth and from co-pays. It's just, I just want to say, Dennis, that's really hard. And my heart goes out to you because I don't know how you were doing it, and good luck to you. And I also want to say, how wonderful is it that Dennis has 2 teachers that will want to return and work for him? But just remember, that's 2 centers or wherever those people are working that forgive this language, they're going to be totally screwed. When those people give their notice and they say, I'm going back to work for my old employer, they're going to be like, what do I do? Because every day we do that. It's the big F-bomb and it's what are we going to do to get through this day? So it's just hard.
I appreciate that very much, Lauren. Trin? Oh, you're on mute as well.
Thank you, Dennis and Lauren and all the advocates and workers. My heart goes out to you. This is where I think OWD could do a better job. Not that we have been slacking off. That's not what we've been doing. We've been doing a lot of other workforce training and worker protection bills and a variety of things. So if there is anything that we can do in terms of tuition, paying for childcare workers, getting that last bit of license, finishing up on an associate degree or a certification, we'd be more than happy to have a conversation about that. If it's $800, a few $1,000, $4,000 or $5,000, let's talk about that. $50,000 is when I say, well, I'm not sure I can justify that, but we are happy to talk about that. If it's if you can offer incentives for workers such as transportation, professional development, we're happy to talk about that. I also think that the city can do a better job with looking at vacant spaces. So what are the spaces that are open so that they can lend to other nonprofits and to other agencies so that it could pay for or subsidize overhead. And so, for the childcare industry, the first thing, a lot of folks have said, hey, while we're waiting for legislation and the Build Back Better funds and bills to come down, there are things that we can do here. What are the list of things that we can do now? And then and start putting together action items that we can work together as a city to really just do it.
Fantastic. Thank you. And then Sarah, we'll go to you, and then I think we'll wrap up this hearing. Thank you.
The last thing I wanted to say was that there's a really great organization called the Reinvestment Fund that does incredible data, early education, analytic data projects. It would only cost about $60,000 or $70,000 to do it for the entire city of Boston. And if folks want to look at it, if you go to the Reinvestment Fund and look at their early ed maps, you can see other cities. You can see buildings that used to be childcare that aren't. You can break it down by language spoken, neighborhood, all sorts of different things. But a lot of other cities have seen the Reinvestment Fund heat maps and that work as a real catalyst to being able to make impactful changes.
Thank you very much. Well, I appreciate everyone's input this afternoon, answers to the questions and presentations, and very thoughtful discussion about the work that we have to do, especially in this space. Councilor Mejia, as you are the lead sponsor, if you have any closing remarks, and then we'll adjourn this meeting.
No, I just wanted to say thank you again to Janae from 509, and Sarah and Kristen and Laura and Trin. I mean, everybody really stepping up and really helping us understand the work. I think that oftentimes people take for granted what they don't know. And to Kristen's point, in terms of what we can do in the city, I think it is really clear that this is the moment for us to seize if we're really serious about economic and justice and equity, and really centering this conversation in a way that no one's going to be left behind or shortchanged. We have an opportunity and a responsibility here as the city to take the lessons that we've learned here and take the work to another level. And so we look forward to working alongside you in partnership to do just that. So thank you all for your work and your commitment, and looking forward to building and getting us to where we need to be. Thank you.
Thank you, Councilor Mejia, and also to Jason, Tiara, and Ayana, I think is who we missed. Have a great afternoon, everyone. This meeting is adjourned.
Thank you so much.
Bye.